Adekiniasach. Gan hawane datayat takat yuhan. Nilchish hati ati. Kanachatu yak hati ati. Ya khana Egan kakaya. Welcome everyone to the evening at Egan. I am woefully unprepared for the business portion of tonight's event, so I've leaned on my colleague Sarah here to just talk about a few upcoming evening at Egan events, and in particular the One Book, One Campus events that are happening this week. I don't want anyone to miss out on any of the opportunities that are present with our visiting authors, filmmakers, and Gwich'in Elder. In addition, there are some flyers on the back table there for some Alaska Native language events, for some Alaska Native studies events, and also a chance to just have a dialogue with our visiting elder about language and linguistics. And I prepared a little introduction here that's half Tlingit, half English. And on the way over here, I was also making these mini flyers, which are 2 to a page. And I cut my speech in half. And it was almost like the golden ticket in Willy Wonka, where it would be hidden amongst the flyers. But I was able to dig them out just in case you were going to proofread my Tlingit. But I was going to say, whoever finds it gets to give the opening speech. And you better hope you get the Tlingit. But it cut it almost exactly in half, so I guess it makes sense that it's a one-page introduction. It's half Tlingit, half English, so it was kind of a fun metaphorical thing for me. Anyhow, Sarah Ray will take care of the business side because I am unfortunately disorganized.
Thanks. I'm Sarah Ray, and I'm helping to organize this year's One Campus, One Book programming, which is really exciting, with the help of Ernestine Hayes, of course, who's going to be your speaker tonight. She kicks off 3 weeks of pretty amazing speakers. Next Friday, we're going to have the Gwich'in Elder, Randall Tetlichi, who is the main person that Karsten Hewer and Leanne Allison speak to, the First Nations person they speak to about caribou in the book Being Caribou. So we're really excited to have him here for a week Elder in Residence program, and lots of programming around that if you'd like to know more about and things that you can participate in, let me know, send me an email, shoot me an email. Sarah Ray is my name, and my email is sjray. You can just find it on the UAS website. So Randall will be here next week for that, which is really exciting. And then the week after that, the Friday after that, he'll have a talk, an evening at Egan talk next Friday on human caribou relations, and he'll be able to answer questions. If you've read the book Being Caribou, or if you haven't, it doesn't matter. Come and see what he has to say from his perspective, which is a really great balance. Karsten Hewer is coming. He's the author of Being Caribou, and he'll be here the week after, the Friday after, to talk about, he gives a really wonderful presentation that I've seen before, and it's called Necessary Journeys. And Being Caribou is the second of 3 necessary journeys that he has done and written about, and he will talk about all of those journeys in his presentation at Evening at Egan 2 Fridays from now. Yes, and then I would be remiss to neglect the fact that Karsten's wife, Leanne Allison, went on the journey with him, the Being Caribou 4-month or 5-month trek following the porcupine herd, and she made a film, a documentary of the experience. And so she will be screening that film and answering questions and talking about that experience Thursday before Karsten. So that's 2 Thursdays from now, if that makes sense. I believe that's November 15th. And that will be at 5:30 in Egan 112, which is the lecture hall. That's in conjunction with my environmental film class. So we're really excited to have her actually visiting us to talk about her film. So a great way to compare the book and the film if you're interested in those kinds of things. So welcome to all of those things. Those are all open to the public. Thanks.
Way Assistant Professor of Alaska Native Languages Khatsati. Nilchish Takatuhan Stakakhatati Konachachaya. Adat Rakatangi Achat away Sankatlakt. Hetlatine Hayati Yagus Ikwan Yurkatangi. Hatlinket Yurkatangi Ayar Tlachwasach Atlatzin. Gunilchish Hati Atit Takatuhan. ach tuyak each atat yuk achatangi. San kallach ti du sauk. Guski kwan chenach Ernestine Hayes. Kagwantant sati ach away ach at away ho. Quchit ti du sauk hastu naka hiti. Yak eich ukusani a kaushachit. An ka chudzi ka askatu chudzi shkatnigi ayatu yiz kuku. Ka tlat shachawut lingit ayatu shukwa kuku. Way 2007 Washdan Kwan Kuku Award a Yawatlak. Shiyat deheni ya atnaskweni kuku tukye yati du kashkiti. Ha kashkiti ku atlati wuxati we UAS kag. Dauk undachkandu jiwu. Katlach wasatla kutzi awayach at san katlach. Katlach edach ayayat. Hutsu aya ach ish has kagwantanch usti. Shawuda neki. Utlokdach ha dachchan hakina keutzenuk. Atutlitzin. Zu kushtu yachta saya tushakayi. Atu jide yatgatutiyin ha dachchan satiyi ka. Achayayi dats stu wakshi yich tutla yich. Atlitzin du yuch atangi zu san kallacht. Ha dachchan ki yan yach away. Atutlitzin. Hatu nago yachyati hakena keutzenuk. Stikat Johan. Gedenduch ede konayas ach. Aguchtatan. Gnilchish. Thank you all for coming. I'm happy to talk about my paternal aunt. Her name is San Kallacht, but the people at the base of the clouds call her Ernestine Hayes. She is Kagwantan, and that is why she is my paternal aunt. Their clan house is called Wolf House. She has written great books. The Story of the Town Bear and the Forest Bear is her newest book, and Blonde Indian is her first. It won the 2007 American Book Award. Her work is in many scholarly publications. She's one of our writing teachers here at UAS. She has 4 grandchildren. And I just want to say how amazing she is, my paternal aunt, San Kallacht. This is from Charlie Joseph's mouth. He was also Kagwantan, my father's people. Self-respecting people. Even from long ago, we have placed our grandchildren high above ourselves. Yes, we cherish them. Even those things we treasure, we used to offer up to them, to those who are our grandchildren. That is why we made these songs their vision. We also cherish her words, San Kallacht. Like our grandchildren, we cherish them. Like spiritual medicine, we lift them up. Everyone, listen closely. She will speak. Gnilchish, kecha.
First, thank you to the Kwan people for allowing us to stand here on this beautiful land. Gunilchish. Gunilchish, Lance Twitchell, for your kind words. Gunilchish. It's customary to introduce oneself and to make clear one's lineage before beginning to speak. But in this case, I offer my introduction at the end of my talk. It's also common practice to declare that I do not intend my words to offend, and to ask your forgiveness in that eventuality. While I don't expect that to occur, nevertheless, I trust that it evinces the care with which I have attempted to craft my words when I say, please forgive me if my words offend you. It is not my intention to do so. Before we address the question of what we shall do with our histories, it behooves us to take a quick look at the history of this place and interrogate the foundational assumptions upon which the systems that shape our understanding of success, failure, and values are constructed. Almost every source describes the long record of native use and occupation that took place before European contact as prehistory. Indigenous groups, however, possess a history of thousands of years of occupancy and exodus, relocation and settlement, exploration and discovery, embedded throughout the generations in legal process, artistic declarations, symbolic regalia, and oral tradition at least as accurately, and in many cases more accurately, than the European system of writing that was used for many years after contact to remove civil rights and appropriate lands. We must always remember that before European contact, native cultures possessed vigorous legal systems, effective educational systems, efficient health systems, elaborate social orders, sophisticated kinship systems, complex languages, profitable trade systems, every social institution needed for a culture to flourish for thousands of years. We do well to remind ourselves that had the colonial invasion not taken place, Alaska Native people would still be living in the 21st century. Our lives would still be modern. Paved roads, airports, and electricity would still occur here in Lingit Aani. Some things would be different, of course. We would be speaking our own language. We would be living in houses of our own design. We would not be devastated by incarceration, alcoholism, violence, poverty. Our children would be healthy. It is edifying also to remember that oral literature, spoken wisdom, spoken history, spoken poetics, reflects the land from which it springs. In most Alaska timelines, sections titled Prehistoric to the Current Era seem quite brief, sending the plain message that those events took place in prehistory and therefore are perhaps not as exact, perhaps not as important. After the near eradication of indigenous systems and institutions, it's true that we are left with alphabet-inscribed records that date only from 1741 in the current system of counting years. Written records begin in that year with a European man by the name of Chirikov. Descriptions of events subsequent to Chirikov are far less perfunctory, communicating to students of history the unspoken but clear message with regard to the significance of Eurocentric adventures when compared to indigenous history keeping. When we take oral history seriously, though, we will invest our thoughtful acknowledgement of indigenous records of history into the design of our studies and into our accounts of those events. For what is oral history if it is not recorded history? Absolute fidelity to the written word carries with it a predictable distrust of the spoken word. Add to this the European-based system of conferring legality upon written documents, and the stage is conveniently set for the disregard of history, art, and beliefs of culture that are based on oral tradition, especially when they occupy coveted lands. Let's take a moment to note the important difference between the passing on of knowledge, conventions, history, beliefs, worldview, traditions, convictions, truths, and storytelling as it has come to be understood from an alphabet-based perspective that privileges the written word and undervalues the spoken word. We acknowledge that native cultures and social systems were sophisticated and complex before European contact, and they remain so today. In the same way, we acknowledge that oral tradition is far richer and more complex than a quick glance through the modern lens permits us to recognize. We do well to remind ourselves that the widespread bias for the written word is a product and, in fact, a function of modern Western European power. History that has been kept by oral tradition has been shown in many cases to be reliable and more accurate than the written histories associated with certain events. So it is wise to learn about the original people of what is now this part of Alaska from a less Eurocentric perspective. From time to time, people are occasionally kind enough to reference my work, Blonde Indian, an Alaska Native memoir, and it is from that work I take some passages and draw the essential trope that likens Alaska Native land to the life of the land. As Native American literature, Blonde Indian is a polyvocal work that weaves many stories together, combining voices in a way that values the variety of each speaker's experience, but more importantly, underscores the parallel nature of our lives and the evident relationship of our circumstance. This multi-perspective characteristic of Native literature illustrates what we might do with our histories, that is, underscore the parallel nature of our lives and value the evident relationship in our circumstances. Even though classified in the Western tradition as memoir, Blonde Indian contains fiction as well as nature writing and other types of writing generally described as genres in the Western European tradition. The fictional story that weaves through the story of the bear and the salmon, the story of the land, and my own story features fathers and sons during 20th century Alaska. A boy, the story's character, who grows up to be Old Tom, is taken from his parents at a young age and sent to live in Haynes House and then to Mount Edgecombe School. He returns to visit his family for a few days after finishing high school. It's the last time he will ever see his family. This boy, who grows up to be Old Tom, asks advice from his mother and father. He's not sure if he should join the Euro-American war effort called World War II. His father has no answers, but cautions him about one thing. Son, he says, these people have come in and taken the land, and what they do to the land, they will do to us. Subdue, control, manage, pollute, appropriate, and finally, revere. Although it appears in a fictional strand, Haynes House did indeed exist. In fact, I myself was sent there for a short while when I was just entering my teens. It was a church-run home where Native children were sent who under the American legal system had been declared wards of the newly formed state. Sent there to learn how to work in gardens, how to serve at table, how to mop floors, how to speak and write English, how to pray. All functions of the boarding school arm of the colonial theater of social weapons whose effects have inevitably resonated throughout our generations. Haynes House was only one manifestation of those instruments with which a dominant culture exercises its power. An education designed to further its own values, language, and vocabulary to serve its own aims, laws to advance its own agenda and religions, that is to say, its philosophies, its worldviews, and its sciences, to confer precedence on its own beliefs, to privilege its own creations and its own creation. All cultures have oral histories that include their own creation stories. Even though these United States are quite young in comparison to world cultures, it nevertheless is a culture, and as such possesses its own creation myths. Creation myths of this country include freedom of thought and religion, justice for all, equality, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are some of the creation stories that people who belong to this culture tell one another. In 1845, a name was given to the American conviction that their God had placed European immigrants onto blank territory, which was theirs by divine right. This ideological justification was termed manifest destiny. Although it wasn't named until 1845, the conviction had been in place at least since Columbus and has effectively served as a rationalization for American territorial expansionism, colonialism, and war-making throughout the admittedly brief history of this country, whether termed manifest destiny, commercial imperialism, or, as described by Kipling, the white man's burden. Although Russian traders had a longer history in other parts of what became Alaska, it wasn't until around 1800 that the settlement named New Archangel was established near the place that is now Sitka. The native people here in Lingit Aani were never conquered, and the Russians kept to the coast, remaining for the most part inside their stockade, tolerated by Tlingit people because it was good for trade. Some 60 or 70 years after that, the fur trade no longer profitable and the Tlingit continuing to engage in armed conflict to keep Russians in their place, Russian and American governments, one a relatively young empire that was to see its downfall in another 50 years, the other a republic that had been formed less than 100 years before, executed the convenient agreement based on a European concept termed doctrine of discovery that resulted in what some scholars have dared to term an illicit transaction. Thus was American manifest destiny extended beyond contiguous continental borders, and another creation story was born. This one termed Seward's Folly, expressly articulated in Seward's 1869 address when he observed on a visit to Sitka that the Indian tribes will do here as they seem to have done in Washington Territory and British Columbia. They will merely serve the turn until civilized white men come. And come to Alaska they did, bearing with them their own style of education, their own laws, their own language, their own philosophies and worldviews, their own literature, their own heroes, their own holidays, their own creation story of wilderness and a rugged frontier. Here in Lingit Aani, the New Archangel transaction was observed by Native people, but its import was not at once recognized. Before long, though, it became evident that the Russian trading presence had been replaced by the intolerant representatives of a land-hungry United States who believed that they had come to this place by divine right, and it was their God-given responsibility to force all Native people to speak English, to convert all Native people to some form of Christianity, and to introduce Native people to certain other attributes of European civilization: how to serve, how to farm, how to clean. Among the first things that Tlingit lost was their mobility. For a populace that practiced moving about from season to season, summer to winter, fall to spring, it was a significant loss. But it was a necessary one for American expansion, taking from the Tlingit their ancestral rights to productive fishing grounds and other important resources. Of course, Tlingit also lost most of their tangible property, including clan totems, family treasures, crest blankets and bowls, carved boxes, house posts, even mortuary objects taken from the very graves of their loved ones. What wasn't immediately taken, both tangible and intangible, would be seized by individuals and by the American government in years to come. With the loss of the ancestral right to fish in certain places according to well-established Tlingit law, many Tlingit lost wealth and status. In some remote places, in spite of occurrences such as the bombing of Yangon in the 1880s, some Tlingit were able to hold on to their language and traditional practices for another generation or two. Not a long time, considering that the Lingit social system, cultural practices, and ways of life had developed over the course of hundreds of generations. Lingit history is measured by the movement of glaciers, by people who have occupied and loved this land since time immemorial. Most of us know that the art of people indigenous to what is now Southeast Alaska is sophisticated and highly developed. Not a few people are aware that the Lingit matrilineal social structure kinship system is quite complex. A few other people know that the Lingit language is also extremely complex, employing complicated rules of grammar and syntax. Fewer people are aware of the long-established Lingit legal system. The Lingit belief system and worldview seem to have been all but obliterated, and almost no one suspects or will admit that by the time of U.S. takeover, the traditional educational system had been in place and effective for many generations. And of course, these truths are no less valid when examined in the context of any other indigenous culture that has been in place for generation upon generation. The land now known as Southeast Alaska is rich. 5 kinds of salmon come to our shores: humpback, coho, chinook, sockeye, chum. Many fish live in our waters: halibut, cod, herring, hooligan, rockfish, trout, fish to eat fresh, fish to dry for winter, fish to smoke. And not just the flesh of the fish. Place hemlock branches beneath the water when the herring are on their way. Sitka is one of the best places to do this now. After the herring have spawned, pull up the branches covered with herring eggs for a traditional delicacy. In Juneau, when it's time for the herring to spawn, we might wait for news that herring eggs have arrived. We hope for word that eggs are being given away at the tribal building, or a message that down at the harbor a fishing boat is giving away branches. Even those of us who no longer have big families can still share, can smell on the gathered eggs the sea from which they were pulled, can relish the fresh spring flavor and hear the crunch of tiny eggs as they pop inside our happy mouths, seal grease dripping from our grateful hands. And not just fish from the water, seaweed of more than one type to collect in the spring, to dry and use throughout the year in cooking. It's best when cooked with salmon eggs, or to eat dry like popcorn. Clams, cockles, king crab, Dungeness, gumboot, sea churn, mussels, shrimp, abalone, seals for seal meat and seal grease. And not just the waters, from the forest, all kinds of berries. Salmonberry, huckleberry, blueberry, raspberry, soapberry, cranberry, nagoonberry, jacobberry, strawberry, thimbleberry, every berry that can be imagined, to eat fresh, to dry, to preserve in seal oil for a taste of summer during the darkened winter night. Wild celery, wild lettuce, wild rhubarb, greens and herbs of all sorts, birds for their eggs, especially seagulls, deer meat, mountain goat, porcupine, bears for their hides, wood from the thick forest, cedar for carving, spruce for making into our houses, hemlock for burning in our fires. It is a rich land indeed, our Lingit Aani, our land of the people, our ancestors' land. Some people like to say that it is because the land is so rich that we developed the elaborate social system and sophisticated art forms for which our people are known. Yellow cedar carvings, red cedar bentwood boxes and house screens, stylized woven blankets, form-line painting and design. It's true that ours is one of the most intricate art forms in the world, with difficult conventions, delicate techniques. And certainly our culture is complex. Upon the land that is now Southeast Alaska, we, the original people, the Lingit, developed a matrilineal society with a richness of culture rivaled only by the richness of our ancestral land. We take from the land our history and our stories. We identify our clans with our cousin the brown bear and our ancestor the raven. We honor the fish upon which we depend by taking them as crests. Ours is not a culture that could have been formed anywhere else. Ours is a history that could have taken place only upon the very land from which we receive our essential spirit. The Lingit Nation, the whole group of people united by common physical boundaries, language, and by custom, is the first order of social classification. The people who live on Lingit Aani are one people. Next is the division into two subgroups, the eagle and the raven. Contemporary scholars call these two groups moieties, but my grandmother only ever called them sides. Sometimes the eagle side is also called the wolf side, perhaps taken from one of its largest clans, who are now called the Wolf Clan, but who once had as their main crest the eagle. Nevertheless, there are only two sides. The two sides occupy a ceremonial, reciprocal relationship to one another and sustain the balance that is fundamental to the Lingit worldview. Traditionally, an eagle marries a raven. When raven ears are pierced, it is by tradition an eagle who takes up the ceremonial needle. When an eagle wants a new pole or screen or bentwood box, by tradition, he commissions a raven carver to choose the wood, to make the design, to cut the cedar. When a raven dies, it is the eagle who acts as pallbearer, who sees to the business of death, who comforts raven relatives in their grief, who wipes away raven tears from beloved raven faces. Next comes the clan. The clan forms the basic political unit. It is the clan with which an individual most profoundly identifies. It is the clan to which one's allegiance is owed. It is the clan that forms relationships. The clan owns crests, stories, histories, the right to use different parts of the land, and the names. We do not own our own names. The clan owns our names. It is the clan that must never be denied and must never be abandoned. It is the clan that will live on. Next, the house groups, made up of related individuals in a matriline. Sometimes house groups become so large that they split off. They occasionally become new clans if they are large enough, powerful enough, rich enough. Sometimes clans separate for other reasons: envy, jealousy, rivalry. Sometimes such a thing divides the clan. When one group leaves, it might become a new clan. Then there will be another clan upon the face of Lingit Aani. This is one of the ways in which the culture is meant to remain alive. Across this complex linear descent is laid a division based on geographical markers and indicating the place from which the clan springs. This lateral division, called the Kwan, does not change with the individual's location. For instance, the particular clan to which I belong springs from Sitka. Although it is said that generations ago certain women traveled north from Sitka to Klukwan for the purpose of marriage, they continued the Chilkat-Sitka alliance, but they remained Sitka Kwan. Although my family has lived in Juneau on Ak Kwan territory for more than a century, although my family owns property in the Juneau Indian village, although my mother Kokwe, my grandmother Saudu'u, and my great-grandmother Kadustine are buried in the Evergreen Cemetery downtown, where if all goes well, I will join them to rest in the arms of this beautiful place upon which the Ak Kwan so generously allow us to live and to die. I remain, as my mother before me and my children after me, Sitka Kwan. I was born in the Juneau Indian village at the end of the Second World War. For the first few years of my life, I lived with my grandmother in our old house at the edge of the village, while my mother was in and out of the hospitals for tuberculosis. My grandmother spoke the Tlingit language. My mother understood it but didn't speak it. After my mother and I left our old house in the village, I heard our language spoken less regularly, and before long could understand only a little and pronounce only a few words. My grandmother told me things her own grandmother had told her, things that I in turn told my own grandchildren when they were growing up. She spoke to me of behavior and attitude. She continued to tell me stories and history. She described the world around me. But even though my grandmother communicated to me a way of looking at the world, the now dominant culture communicated another way of looking at myself. In the late 19th and 20th centuries and early 20th centuries in the United States, schools were established, churches were built, American laws enforced as was being done in the rest of the new nation. The bombing of the village of Yangon in 1882 was one of the last events in the national effort known as the Indian Wars, which was put to a forceful and indisputable end at Wounded Knee. 15 years after the Alaska Purchase, a mere 130 years ago, less than 2 grandmothers' lifespans. In Alaska, Native children were sent to schools located outside Alaska in the first few years of the 20th century. And in the 1920s, 3 vocational schools were opened in the territory. By mid-century, several boarding schools and boarding homes were in existence, including Mount Edgecombe, Rankle Institute, Haynes House, and others. Some served the purpose of public schooling and were run by the government. Some were for the purpose of housing children who had been removed from their homes and were run by religious organizations. Most schools actively discouraged elements of Native culture such as language, art, and ceremonies. Some actively enforced Christian practices. Few, if any, provided a curriculum that allowed a Native child to take pride in any aspect of Native identity. Remember that Native students attended these schools in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and were given the clear message that in order to be civilized, they must forget their Native identity, convert to Christianity, and in most cases be vocationally educated in a service occupation. The children who attended these schools lost their language, lost their identity, and lost their history. It's no surprise that many of the students of these formative years came out of their educational experience with little or even no knowledge of their own cultures. It's no surprise that many of the students of these formative years came out of their educational experience with little or even no sense of self-worth. It's no surprise that many of the students of those formative years came out of their educational experience with little or even no parenting skills. For some, the surprise is that we're still here at all. But we are here. And our language is here. Our history is here. Our land is here. What shall we do with this history? The traumatic effect of the national policies of manifest destiny, removal, assimilation, and conversion is undeniable. When a seemingly endless and overpowering force of people confronts a group of people already in place with the articulated purpose of destroying their culture, the inescapable result is cultural trauma. The only question might be how long it will take. For cultures that were in existence for thousands and tens of thousands of years, it's reasonable to expect that when those cultures are dealt what is intended to be a killing blow delivered over a span of 50 to 60 years, the death, even a speedy one, will take 3 or 4 generations. When seen in that light, we can recognize that the symptoms that so many witnesses bemoan, high school dropout rates, college dropout rates, tuberculosis, poverty, suicide, violence, and more, are symptoms of cultural trauma. We are witnessing a strong culture in a fight for its life. And as we do when we attend any event at the core of which rest questions of life and death, questions of birth and rebirth, questions of survival, we do so with the constant knowledge that in spite of our discomfort, in spite of our remorse, in spite of the disorder, we are witnessing something sacred. You are invited to witness the tenacity of a culture that has had our philosophic center all but destroyed, our ways of education all but obliterated, our language threatened, our sovereignty denied, our laws disregarded, our authority displaced, and our lands, our stories, our identity appropriated. But the gates of colonialism have not prevailed against us. For a few generations, we have stood at a precipitous brink at the end of a path made for us by someone else's history. And now we will make our own path. Alaska Native people were not passive in the face of this invasion. Following armed resistance in the 1700s and 1800s, Alaska Native people have successfully turned the laws meant to oppress them to their own good. A prime example is the Alaska Native Brotherhood, established for the purpose of pursuing land claims in 1912, 8 years after what turned out to be the last great potlatch for many years. Although some of us may now question their choices, and there is no doubt that their decisions were made after lengthy and vigorous debate, it cannot be denied that they were resisting as best they could and working as hard as they could do. A few years later, the Alaska Native Brotherhood, with the powerful support of the Alaska Native Sisterhood, took their claims to the Indian Claims Commission, resisting and working. After many convolutions and contortions, a claim was settled in Tlingit Haida Council, then Tlingit Haida Central Council was formed. After that, ANCSA, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Even more of us may question the choices that went into that transaction, but there can be no doubt that resistance and work were the order of those days. Using the same legal system that caused us so much loss, Native people have worked for the Indian Child Welfare Act in the Molly Hooch case and right up to the recently formed State Commission on Alaska Native Languages. It has been a hard fight, a long fight, but resistance and hard work are still the order of the day. Much of that success is evident in the persistence of our literature and our continuing love of our place. We are speaking of generations. What shall we do with this history? What would we do if in the year 2015, 3 years from now, this American culture was suddenly subdued by another culture that believed theirs was the superior way of living? Their God was the one true God. Their language, the only worthwhile speech. Their history, the only history that mattered. What would happen if this young American society, less than 250 years old, suddenly was rocked by cultural trauma? It's unthinkable. But let's suspend our disbelief for a moment to consider what would happen to our grandchildren's children if in the span of the next 50 or 60 years, a killing blow was delivered to the way of life we now know. What would happen? What would we do? We could no longer speak the English language. Schools, businesses, stores, everything would be conducted in some new language we didn't understand. Our laws would be swept away. No more regulations, acts of Congress, municipal codes, laws as we now know them. Everything would be done according to some new legal system that we didn't understand and that was created and enforced in someone else's favor under a doctrine brought with them from some faraway place, a doctrine that conferred upon themselves the right, the power, the authority, the privilege to take from us what they pleased. Our religions would be abolished. Bible studies and communion and concepts like manifest destiny and American exceptionalism would be seen as prehistoric and evil. There would be no more in God we trust on our money. In fact, there would be no more money. The new currency would be in the hands of others. Our bank accounts, our property, our belongings would suddenly be of no value to us, and most of our remaining wealth would be taken. Our standards of beauty would be ridiculed. Our art would be trivialized. Our literature would become folklore and superstition. Our philosophers and great thinkers would be described as unsophisticated, quaint storytellers. All of our place names would be changed. Our own names would be changed. We would be forced to celebrate peculiar holidays. Our children would be taken from us and sent far away, where they would be forced to forget English, forced to dress in someone else's fashions, and forced to learn trades that prepared them for servitude. Taken from our influence, they would be given unpronounceable new names in a foreign language. They would not learn the history of their country. They would not know who they were related to. And they would receive the strong message that whatever they did, they would never be as good as those who were members of the newly dominant culture. Taken from us at early ages, they would not learn how to parent. Their children would receive the same negative cultural messages. Before long, no one would be learning English as a first language. Before long, our legal and educational and spiritual and social systems and beliefs would disappear. Before long, only a few old ones would remember how it used to be. In time, just a few years beyond that, a resurgence of interest in traditional American culture would occur. After all the land was taken, and all the art destroyed, and all the worldviews that it took almost 250 years to develop were finally done away with, it would become fashionable for people to confess that they were part American. Many would proudly tell others that they were adopted Americans, perhaps honorary Mormons. Some might say their great-grandmother had been an American princess. The few people remaining who spoke English as a first language would be studied. The old photographs that had been hidden away would be brought out for interpretation. Most of the cultural artifacts, including most of the photos, would already be in museums, where they would be visited by curious tourists trying to remain open-minded about such simplistic ways of life. Christian artifacts would be considered beautiful but primitive. People belonging to the then dominant culture would become recognized authorities on the American. Those who were truly part American would possess the least authority in all things, including all things American. Every 2 years, a gathering would be held where part American young people, your grandchildren's children, would dress up in plastic Levi's and construction paper t-shirts and mouth the words of love songs and lullabies in a language they didn't understand. Outside the auditorium, tables of strong-tasting food would offer unfamiliar menus of hamburgers and milkshakes. After the celebration, everyone would go back to their day-to-day lives, where your grandchildren's children would be incarcerated, would drop out of school, would lose their children to new laws, would abuse themselves with whatever addictive drugs were then available, would suffer poverty, depression, anger, shame, and all the other inevitable effects of cultural trauma. Only a few would qualify for programs designed for privileged achievers. Many who somehow managed to make it to higher education would struggle and perhaps drop out. And there would be no lack of reports and meetings and task forces devoted to addressing the problems of their failed assimilation. Unthinkable. Unthinkable, isn't it? By the time the United States reached Alaska, there was no more need for treaties, reservations, agreements, recognition, or negotiation. What the new people wanted, they simply took. What they didn't want, they disposed of. And here we are. What concepts can we draw on from this history to guide us now? How are we to understand the contradictions between this country's creation myths and the actual injustice that occurred? What shall we do with these histories? At the beginning of my talk, I told you about a character in the fictional Strand of Blonde Indian, Old Tom, who as a child had heard his father say that whatever the new people did to the land, they would do to the people who came from that land. Later in the story, Old Tom's son, grown up and a father himself, is hired to go up to Prince William Sound and clean up a bad oil spill. He can't bear to stay there. In his mind, the same system that allowed, created, caused the catastrophe in the first place was now sending people to tell everyone how to clean it all up. Old Tom's experience is a metaphor for our experience. The system that removed children and took land and ridiculed beliefs, polluted and destroyed the culture, polluted and threatened to destroy the land itself, is the same system that is now telling everyone how to clean it all up. The same system that took away the educational system that was in place for generation upon generation is now telling us how to be educated in a system that produces native failure. The same system that took away the legal system that was in place for generation upon generation is now telling us how to make tribal courts in the image of their system that produces native incarceration. The same system that took away our health is now telling us how to be healthy. It is time for resolve. Let our resolve be that laws and language and education will no longer function as weapons of assimilation. Let us admit the inequity of circumstance when knowledge and authority travel only in one direction. Let us resolve to learn about each other. Native people are well schooled in non-native subjects: history, language, literature, religion, philosophy, food, style, standards of beauty, laws, architecture, fairy tales, holidays, creation stories. Those who work as with Native issues or whose activities bring them in contact with Native issues must offer the reciprocal interest that will make our relationships equitable, that will underscore the parallel nature of our lives, that will value the evident relationship in our circumstance. Wherever we live, it is incumbent upon us to familiarize ourselves with all facets of the complex culture and history of our place. And when we speak of a place, we will remember to speak also of its history, of what that place means to the people who once there lived. Not to do so would be like picturing a lush and timeless woman, but choosing not to make mention of her lost children, those children to whom she gave fecund birth, whom she nourished at her rich, fat breast, whom she loved no less than they loved her, who were seized and sent away from her arms, but whom she remembers and longs for every day. That is the same way that the land longs for her children. That is how pitiful the land is without her children. Native cultures, literatures, and worldviews are as rich and complex as the land from which they emerge. If we truly learn about one another, if we are silent for an extra moment when we think and before we speak, if we remember that dominant is not a synonym for superior, then perhaps we can take some time to evaluate not the shortcomings of others, but the limitations of our own ways. Let us consider our own positions in this system. Let us assess our own roles in this manufactured hierarchy. Let us ask of ourselves the question, what can we do? Let us remember that regulations and codes and laws and congressional acts and funding requirements are not the objectives, nor are they the goals. They are not the place where our efforts end. They are the place where our efforts begin. They are the places where we now stand. What shall we do with our histories? You know, for a long time, a particularly shameful period in Alaska history was never acknowledged. During World War II, the native people of what are now the Aleutian Islands were forced to leave their homes, herded onto steerage in unclean boats, deposited in derelict buildings meant for summer canneries in an unfamiliar land, left without adequate food, water, shelter, medicine, clothing, or heat, denied their freedom, and held against their will for years. Many of them died. The rationalization for this treatment was that it was for their protection, for their own good. It was many years before the United States government even admitted that it had happened. It was not until that treatment was acknowledged, was confessed, that the people could even begin to heal. In these circumstances, it is not victims who have the greatest need to heal. It is not only those who endured the suffering who must find a way to mend their lives, find a way to uncover the corruption, find a way to bring truth to the lies. Those who caused it, those who allowed it, those who ignored it, those who witnessed it, those who profit from its privilege, they too have the need to heal. What shall we do with that history? We must confess our histories. We must acknowledge our histories. We must remember our histories. It is only after those things are done that we can begin to heal, and we can begin to communicate with one another as the equals that we are. Let us tell each other stories that underscore the parallel nature of our lives. Let us tell each other stories that value the evident relationship in our condition. Let recognition and respect and knowledge travel in both directions. It's not only Native people who need to remember who we are. When I was 15 years old, my mother and I moved to California, where I lived for 25 long years. I never came back, not once. I never came back home. Finally, when I turned 40, I said, let me go home or let me die with my thoughts facing north. I was unemployed, homeless, penniless. My sons were living with their father or on their own. It took me 8 months to get from San Francisco to Ketchikan, where I camped out all summer and then got a job, a place to stay, and sent for my mother and my sons. 2 years later, I made it all the way back home. And I know I love it more than if I'd never left. One of my first jobs after I came back home to Juneau was at a Native theater where we told old stories and sang and drummed old songs. At the end of each performance, we stood in a line on the stage and introduced ourselves in our native language and then translated what we had just said. I would say, Lingit Aani sangatlakt yuchatu asaq. My Tlingit name is Sankatlakt. Dleitka Kainach Ernestine Hayes yuchatu asaq. My white man name is Ernestine Hayes. Chunk na ayachat. I am Eagle. Kagwantan ayachat. I am of the Burnt House People clan. Guchit ayachat. I belong to the Wolf House. Ganachtedi Dachkhan Hatsati. I am a grandchild of the Ganachtedi. Sitka Kwan. My clan springs from Sitka. The woman standing next to me would step forward and say, Lingit Aani ka steen yuchat duasakwa chukane diayachat. I am of the people from the grassy place, and I belong to Glacier Bay. And I love to hear her say that, for it describes our relationship to the land. Who our land now belongs to, or if land can even be owned, is a question for politicians and philosophers. But we belong to the land. There is not one person, from the most modern corporate executive to the most unsophisticated villager, from the oldest great-grandparent whose dim eyes can see only memories, to the youngest child who has just learned to form the words, who will not say, this is our land, for we still belong to it. We belong to Lingit Aani. This is our culture, for we still belong to it. This is who we are. This is what we will do with our history. Let us all admit our histories. Let us recognize our present path, and together let us all declare our common future. If we are to survive, let us go forward as equals, holding hands. Let us all remember the parallel nature of our lives. Let us all value the evident relationship in our circumstance. When we look at one another, let us all think, you are my human equal. You are my intellectual equal. You are my social equal. It is when we remember our past history together as equals. It is when we communicate our present condition together as equals. It is when we face our uncertain future together as equals that we will heal together as equals. Gunnachish, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Gunnachish. I think we're supposed to remind you there's a short question and answer period, and if you would wait until you have the microphone to speak, because this is being recorded. All right.
Good Chish. I was waiting for someone else. Cha dechet no. Achonke. Knoch tu ik een. Weg kani. Kagwantan shao Yucatan Gika. I've been very moved by your report of our people. Jasach Tawasigu wasach tundetani adatra. Gagiyachta gutcha at least was. Yisa dacha. It is as if our ancestors appeared right in front of us, and their voices spoke to us of the love that we've had for our land, for our resources, for our neighbors, and for anyone that came to our borders. It was always the respect and love that we gave. And through that also you showed that we still have that attitude. That's why I hear what you're saying is our ancestors. I remember my elder Austin Hammond. It's not just for us, it's for all of us. When I speak, I don't just speak to Tlingit people, but I speak to all people, that we can work together, that we can walk hand in hand together and learning together. I just want you to know that through the studies and the way I've felt is much of what you've said tonight. I just want to thank you that you verified many things and have heard the voices of our ancestors. Thank you. Gunalchish.
Gulchish hunch tlach egawe katsu gulchish ach dakanuku khtu yak Jesu halin gitrsati awe da yutu khatank yadu uhan has awe da yutu khatank Stuqa hadati ha'ani ayatu sikhan ya akhtu yati Gulchish. So thank you, Ernestine, my outer shell. That's what you are. And I just wanted to say that I feel as if our Tlingit ways of being and knowing are still here with us. I feel that. And when we hear the language being spoken, you know, hear it like this, and then when we hear these words where it is true speaking, you know, it's just very powerful. It touches us, it reaches us. We hear you, we're hearing you. So, Gunalchish.
Chatsuach twasigu gunalchish I nyechwakai ach de chank awe isati ganach tedi ayachat gunalchish ach de chank. I thank you for sharing the way you did. I listened to my grandmother before she passed on. She was my mother's sister, actually, but she was like my mom. And before she went, she was 90-something. And before she went, she recalled all the things that she had seen and things that she knew from her elders. And one of the things that she said is that we think differently now. It's like there's no place for my way of thinking. And she felt alone. And in your talk, in your writing, I really want to say, I really appreciate you giving voice to the ancestors. Their broken hearts was voiced out. They weren't forgotten. And I just hope and pray that it'll stay and we'll always remember it. And pray that we don't end up in that kind of situation ever again. And we are moving forward. Klein gunalchish, iyuk tangi kunach wishlitzin, katsu katlitzin. It's powerful, it's strengthening, it's encouraging, and it's very precious. Gunalchish.
Gunalchish.
Thank you, friend. Well, I'm going to speak as someone who grew up here, born in 1952. I can't believe I'm saying that out loud. during the era of what I always called Juno apartheid. There was a village where the native people lived. There was everything around the village where my family, other non-native families lived. All I want to say is thank you, of course, Ganeshish. Speaking as a great Showat, with a very bad Lingit accent, from, Juno, Hayahat. I'm ready for the post-assimilationist period to begin. I'm ready because, just as you put it, my family suffered from this apartheid. We suffered the remnants of it in all those bizarre Catholic and non-Catholic attributes, diseases like guilt and shame. We all know now what was going on when we were children and we were too confused to know what was going on. We know now. We're ready for the next period to begin. So thank you for helping that process. Thank you, Paulish, Marsha, Lance, everyone here. Thank you very much.
Gonna change.
Goodness, Chish, Ernestine. I stand here knowing you're my true sister. We're related. And even though we don't see each other, we communicate that. And I really appreciate you sharing the story of our people. Our ancestors had to really battle genocide. People died young from alcohol, from tuberculosis, from childhood diseases as babies. And still are, I think about my grandparents, Austin and Lillian Hammond, who fought to. They were strong advocates for our people. And the thing about our people is, you think about Paul Mark's family, and you think about Marcia Hodge's grandparents. They were strong advocates because they helped us to be where we are today. And the way we survive isn't what we read in a book, by what we hear, what we heard. I grew up in the Raven House in Haines, and I was fortunate to be around elders when I would come home from high school or school and be greeted by elders. And as through my life, as I grew up, I realized I was more comfortable around elders and people my age. I could really relate. And so it's really good to hear what you put together, because our ancestors are who we depend on for our existence. And yes, we still are battling genocide. I kind of feel maybe our children's generation, they're doing much better, only because of what our grandparents did and our great-grandparents. But they set a path for us to walk, and it's really nice when you look around here and see how many young people are here. It's really important, whether they're native or non-native, that they're here. And because when a lot of people gather, the ancestors come. And anyway, I just really believe in why we're here is because of our ancestors. And I'm gonna Chish for sharing your knowledge, and that's how it should be. Gonna Chish.
Gonna change.
Sheesh. I figured I better join the Raven chorus. Jin kat kadechiak I shuwachichen. Adachawe achlich wugud di klein. Askatuyik de. Aka hatu nagu yuk atangi in konach. Yuk atangi inaya. Chaach ayakonach. Ya yel wakini aya. Yel yak wakini. Ye agach sanuk. Agach sahuk. Chaach wakini. Eu sahuk away achana. Ganil chishach at. Kunach aya. Yak away. Yuk atangi. Ka achtundetani tsu yeyati. Hatlagu kwanki yantundetani dachawe yuk atangi. Ganil chish. 12 days ago, my grandmother took her big walk away from us. So I really appreciated your words in talking about helping us and drying our tears. And that healing spirit was truly in your words because it dried my tears as they came. And I want to thank you for that. These are the types of things that we really need to be discussing. I think we're all collectively afraid of what we might become if we changed who we were. But we know that's what we have to do. Every year we might lose 20 Lingit speakers. We'll be lucky if we gain one. So it's time to fix the math. It's time to reevaluate what we are. Because this world is born of killing machines. But it doesn't mean that's what we have to be. But you have to look at yourself in order to redefine what you are. And it's hard to do as a collective group. But that's the first step, is to take a look at what got us where we are. And to think about the practical steps that are going to create a new awakening. I think of it when I hear children speaking our language, that we're starting to turn the corner. And we're getting close, but it's going to take a collective, collaborative effort, unlike anything we've ever seen. But it's words like yours that just help reaffirm the faith I have in us as people. That's the wrong pronoun. Edit the tape. We're all human beings. And these are the types of things we need to be hearing. We get these ideas of division. You know, I tease my inland Lingit relatives because they say decal instead of decal, or pecan instead of pecan. But it doesn't matter, we're still people. And and so we gotta see past these lines. And those who are interested in studying our language is gonna open your eyes to whole new worlds that are just sitting right here. And that will heal people. We look at all these alarming statistics over and over and over. And the answer's right here where it's always been. I think of Cyril George talking about there was a village that was attacked and everybody ran up into the hills so they wouldn't get captured. And there was a man running and he heard the voice of his nephew. He turned from his safe place and he saw his nephew being captured. So he ran down there to be captured with his nephew so he wouldn't be separated. So with all the false images that are out there, we need to continue to affirm that ours is a culture of great love for one another. As we show that to our children and to our neighbors and to everyone, we're going to continue to open eyes.
Hello, my name is Kate. Thank you for talking with us tonight and sharing everything. And thank you to a lot of people in this room who are really dear to me and helping me learn how to move forward. I have a question to pose back to you. In a world today where everything's compared to machines and computer and people are treated as data and measured by efficiency, it seems to me really obvious, and I know to a lot of people here, that our school systems are broken. It's not our children or our families that are broken or our teachers, it's the schools and its bigger systems. And those walls of intellectual equality are starting to be worn down, but there's still a long way to go. And I was wondering how natives and non-natives can best support our youth, if you have any suggestions as to what you think could help. It's a huge question, that's a loaded question, but you know, we're looking for inspiration, I think, from anywhere, and you have a really strong voice. So how can we help move forward, especially for our youth? Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words. I really don't have lots of answers, but I do know that everyone, almost everyone that I know who is, it seems as though the system, as you say, is broken. It seems as though the artificial entities that have been built are not strengthening us as human beings. But I do know that most of the people who are working in those systems are not only well-meaning and caring and responsible and hard workers, they are willing to learn with each other. So I think maybe if we take our eyes off the broken system and reach out our hands and with the other people who are there with us, I think maybe that's one of the ways we can go forward. I know that the people I talk to every day, even if they're in what seems like a broken system, that they care, that they love, that they're working towards the same vision I want to see. So maybe that's it, but I'm not offering that as an answer. Maybe someone else has another suggestion, but I know that if we keep our eyes on each other and hold each other's hands, that's the way we're going to go forward. Good. All right. That's up.
Goodness, sheesh, Ernestine, for your words. You have eloquence with what you say that my emotions about some of these issues will not allow me to have. My father taught me that the coho were the strongest biting salmon around. They never gave up until they were in the net, and they still tried to get back in the water. And I just wanted to say, uk tu yeyati. You put the coho inside of me with your words. Goodness, cheesh.
Goodness, geez. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your attendance, and I hope we continue this good work. Gunchish.